cool. We're live, and we got that sweet, sweet 16:9 visual that we want. Let's start this off right out of the gate with a sip of tea. Good morning. I should start with a good morning. Happy Friday. Let's have that tea sip. And we're, as you can tell, I'm using the good mic. This is the mic I record the podcast with, and I was like, why are we using compressed audio for these live shows? The only caveat is if I rub stuff together, you can probably hear that. I'm not wearing my headphones, so I can't hear all of the audio distractions either. So bear with me. And if this is a particularly noisy episode, you can let me know in the comments or after the fact and help me out that way. So it's a Friday. We're just getting ready to go and work in Costa Rica. Our tenant is set to guard the place as he does when we go away. And this is the last live show before I head down and work in ceremony. Sit in ceremony myself and then work in ceremony as well as part of that. So that's exciting. It's also like, it's a departure. We leave for a week at a time. And if you imagine leaving where you live for a week every couple of months, that's not an insignificant impact. It's a beautiful thing that we get to experience in our lives, but not insignificant. And so energetically, we're getting set up. We're getting ready to leave for that. And so along those lines, I wanted to show you just a couple very quick things. I think I had two things to show, but now I can only see one. So I was going to show one of the things that we use, one of the tools the shamanic team uses in ceremony is this sash right here. There's a beautiful one. The sash is called a chumbe. And what a chumbe is designed to do is to protect you as you're working in ceremony. Spiritually speaking, we hold, at least in the lineage I'm trained in, that a lot of the way we absorb emotions and most of our feeling center is in the lower portion of our body, sort of around our navel. That's where we experience and feel a lot of our state. And so you can probably get a sense of this, like if you're someone who, like me, likes to eat a lot of food stimulates that center. And if you've learned to shut down that part of yourself, food is a way to kind of activate it. So we can do a lot of that. It's also a way to protect yourself. If you put weight on your stomach, then there's insulation between your core, your feeling body, and whatever's coming through. It has to go through those layers of insulation. So in ceremony, we wear a chumbe, those of us that work on the shamanic team, the medicine team. And the chumbe is a belt you wrap around your navel. It's very important. It covers your navel. And what that does is protects you from other people's energy coming in. So it provides a little bit of a way to spiritually, energetically keep yourself sovereign as you're doing your work in the Maloka, the sacred temple. So that's a chumbe. These are typically blessed by the shamans that are running the ceremony. At the end of a week of ceremony, there's an opportunity to have things blessed, and then the shaman will do his work with that. And then we take it and use it in our ceremonic work. So I think that's everything that I actually have to show. I'm certain I had one more thing. I'll probably remember it halfway through another point and then and then jump off and do something else. I'm just going to make sure that we're live here in the places where we need to be live. Make sure that this video is showing up. Yeah, I see me live, so that's a good starting point. And then I can just jump off of Facebook there, and then I can put my attention right here. So what's been going on for me this week? This week I've had mostly off. It's the ideal way for me to do this kind of work is to give myself a break before I go away and do some pretty deep work. And so it's been kind of nice. A bit of a relaxing period, a bit of a slowdown, a bit of a time to get all my errands done. And by get all my errands done, what I mean is look at all the errands I need to do and then neglect to do them. And instead just like laze about. I remember the other thing I was going to show you, which is I'm breaking in some new boots today. I got some new Chelsea boots. I'm going to show them to you. Whoop-ha! Aren't that cool? Look at that cool fabric, that plaid. So those are from Fluvogs, John Fluvogs, which is based, a shoe store founded, I think internationally recognized at this point, founded in Vancouver. We have a store in Victoria. And for people that love shoes and funkiness and designs that are kind of really, really cool and unique, Fluvox is the place to go. So I'm wearing boots when I normally would not. It's quite a shift for me to try to break them in. Sometimes Bay will go out for dinner or something, and Bay will wear like a new pair of shoes, and I'm like, oh no, I know how this is going to go. Because sure enough, we'll start to walk for 5-10 minutes, 30 minutes. We like to take a walk before we go for dinner, and her feet will start to hurt. Y'all know what I'm talking about? That leather is stiff, and your feet haven't yet adapted to it, and so there's like that breaking in period. So I'm preemptively doing that. Smart guy right here. Anyhow, that's all we're going to talk about that. We've got a ton of really good topics provided by our audience. I'm excited to get into them. So I think where I'm going to begin today is by taking a sip of tea and then figuring that out. Do it live. Figure out what we're going to do. You notice with this mic, I don't have as much space on my desk as I normally would, so I have to do a bit of managing to make sure that my teacup is not going to get ruined. Oh, this is also new beard vision. For those of you on catching the video, I got my beard trimmed and shaped, which is fantastic because like growing out your hair, growing out your beard is a slow, frustrating, annoying process because you kind of have to just let it grow before you can start to shape it. You got to get the length in there. And so month after month I go and I'm like, can you make me look a little bit less, I don't mind looking a little wild, but like a little bit less like I just came in off of a Viking ship. And they're like, yeah, we can do our best, but if you really want to get a nice shape in your beard, kind of get that angle, then you're going to have to just let it grow. And so this time I went down and I was like, how are we doing? And they're like, yeah, we can probably start to work with this. So I've got some shape in there. We've taken a bunch off of the sides so that it's a little streamlined. My face doesn't look very, very wide. It feels very nice. And they did some work on my mustache so that it's not constantly in my mouth getting covered with food. So feeling good. Feeling and looking good today. It's a good start. What a great place to do a live show from. Sir, let's see. I think where we're going to start... Hey, Ilya, nice to see you. Nice to have you with us. Good morning and happy Friday. Where we're going to start today is, let's start by talking about projects. And so Tara, one of the members of The Forge, one of our members on our leadership team, asks, can we talk about projects and results? Like, let's say you, Adam, get 75% of what you declared by when you declared it inside of some mythical project. What would you do next? So let's talk a bit about projects. We'll talk a bit about people's relationship to projects, and we're going to talk about declaration inside this topic. So a project is simply like structure. It's just a container. And it's a container designed to support us to create a particular result, a tangible result that we want in this life of ours. And projects are really, really, really important and often totally stepped over. Totally stepped over everywhere, but especially in coaching. And there's some reasons for that. Coaching and leadership, I should say. So what happens, a project requires first and foremost a declaration. The declaration is like my commitment. It's I'm going to achieve this by this point. So it's a what will I achieve? And a by when will I achieve it? And as soon as I even suggest that as like what a project is about, how we create a project, people will have typically a reaction. And if they don't yet have a reaction, they'll have a reaction once we start to invite them to make an actual declaration. So imagine you have like a desire to find a new job. You're like, this is really important to me. I'm not happy in my existing job. I want to create a new job. That really matters. It's the most important thing in my life. I'm going to make it happen. Great. So the first thing we're going to ask you is, it sounds like the what is the new job. By when will you have that? And people go, well, but I can't say that because it depends on a myriad of factors, and I don't know where the job will be, and I don't even know yet what I want that job to look like, and all of that stuff. And so what people try to do, most of us, is we try to like figure that stuff out and then make a declaration. And that doesn't really work when we're talking in the realm of a breakthrough result. It'll work in terms of like a life that you can predict and manage, but that's not where breakthroughs lie. And so what happens is when you make a declaration, when you say, I will achieve a new job by December 1st, 2024, or 2023 even. Let's say December 31st, 2024, I'll have a new job. So I've got what? 3 months. That's going to drive up some stuff because I'm like, there's all these things I don't know. And the beauty of the declaration is that it forces your hand. It says to you, like, now that you've said that, you got shit you got to get into action around. You got stuff you got to start to make happen in your life. And that is a beautiful, beautiful gift to yourself that most of us don't like. I'm going to get into a sec why we don't like it. But first, the possibility of that is that now that you've put a date on the table, and even better, if you've publicly shared that with some people, maybe the whole public, maybe Facebook, maybe your mastermind group, maybe just 2 friends that are holding that container for you. If you're publicly sharing that, it now calls action out of you. So if you're like, man, I said December 31st, I'm going to get a new job, but I have no idea what that job is. Great. What do you have to do to start to make that come to reality? Like, what do you have to research? What do you have to figure out? And how long are you going to give yourself to do that? And what's going to fit inside your time frame? So once we have the declaration, then we can start to plan the things that we want to do to get there. Until we have that declaration, you'll probably notice that things go a particular way. And the way they tend to go is like relaxed, casual. There's no pressure, but there's also no like skin in the game. There's nothing calling you forward into the future. It's like, well, I'll just sit here and like, when the new job comes to me, I'll take it. And that's totally fine. But what that gives you is a life where you will get the new job if and when it shows up. But until then, you will stay in your current job. And if you're actively complaining about your current job, talking about how it's unimportant, or if you said what we had talked about at the start, which was, I hate my job and it's the most important thing that I get a new job, then that approach to like waiting and see, it's probably not the best way to move forward. And in leadership, in transformational coaching, what we're doing is we're supporting you to create the result under your own steam now, rather than when and if it shows up. Hey, Tara. That's right, Tara. Yeah, we're diving into your question right at the start. Thank you for it. So, this declaration kind of, hey, Daniel, nice to see you. Audio's a bit low. Let's turn it up. Let's turn up that gain. How's that? Let me know how that is, and I'll try to get a little closer to the mic. You can tell me if it's too low or if it's too high or what it is. I think, I wonder, no, this is definitely going through my mic. And if I tap this, tell me if this comes through. Does that tap come through? I appreciate the opportunity for you to sort of test that a little bit for me. So as we create that declaration, what happens is that a couple things. One, we have to start to look at what is going to be required from us. And we are taking off the table the opportunities to be at the effect of our lives. Meaning, I'm taking off the table stuff like, well, I just don't know what I want to do, so I can't get a new job. We're taking that off the table. We're saying, no, I'm going to get a new job. And so I can no longer just sit and relax and kind of be at the effect of like, I don't know. Now I have to figure that out. It calls me into action. So that's the first thing that it does when we create a declaration. The second thing that a declaration does is it has us, as we start to plan, it checks our feet about our expectations. So, for example, once I had someone who was a coach and they said, I want to get a full client practice by, in 3 months' time. And we were like, okay, great, let's look at that. And he said, okay, that's going to be like 12 clients because I want to make this much money and I have to charge that much. I'm like, okay, great. What are you going to have to do to get there? And we started to like build that out. So we started to look, okay, I'm going to have to talk to this many people. I'm going to have this many coaching conversations. I'm going to have to do that. I'm going to have to do that. And as we were looking at this, where he ended up was he said, I'm starting to feel kind of disempowered around this. I'm feeling really, really stressed out about this commitment. And it feels like an impossible amount of work for me to get done in 3 months. That's a beautiful thing. Because what that's doing is it's helping him see, maybe you have to adjust your expectations of the results you're going to create. Like if if what is going to be required is not something that you're a yes to, if that's too stressful, too hard on you, and just not what you want to create, then you might have to say 6 months out or 12 months out. So once we start with a declaration, all of this stuff comes to the forefront. What most of us do instead of that is we avoid a declaration altogether, and then we just hope that things will get better. And we sort of like off the side of our desk sort of do a little bit of stuff, but we never actually really commit to moving it forward because we've not drawn a line in the sand for us. So that's the first step. When we're creating a project, we begin with that declaration. And then we do some other stuff that I'm not going to go too much into, but one of the most important things is we set milestones along the way. So the milestone is like, okay, a month from now, what needs to have occurred? And that allows me to kind of burp away from the microphone. That milestone allows me to kind of create a mini declaration. So that instead of saying like a year from now, I'm going to have 12 clients, and then checking in 11 months from now and being like, it totally failed and it didn't work. That milestone a month out lets me check like, hey, how am I doing towards this thing that I said I really want to make happen? How am I doing in alignment with my commitment? That's really, really valuable. And what happens when we hit to that first milestone is typically we didn't do everything we said we were going to do. And at that point, or things didn't go the way we wanted them to, or they didn't transpire how we wanted, or people didn't say yes the way we thought. And so upon hitting that milestone, we usually become disempowered. And we create a story for ourselves, a disempowering story for ourselves about the milestone. Like the problem is the milestone. I feel bad. I don't feel good about the results I hit. I feel stressed out that I'm not hitting my milestones. And so what I think I'm going to start doing instead of that is I'm going to just no longer have milestones. And oh, what a miracle. I don't feel bad. I don't feel stressed out. That's totally missing the mark. That's totally going back to the old way. That's why people hang out in, I'll just wait and see. It's the misunderstanding that comes from Michael Singer's book, The Surrender Experiment, where people read that and they're like, oh, that sounds so good. I'll just surrender to everything, which is really hard. And I'll just like, my life will open beautifully and I won't feel stress. It's not at all what happens. And so what we want to do is when we hit those milestones and we have a breakdown, meaning we didn't achieve the result we said we were going to achieve, we want to look at what's showing up. And if you are feeling disempowered, if you are feeling stressed out, if you are feeling like you suck, that's beautiful, because that stuff is coming to the surface so we can heal it in coaching, so that we can create the breakthrough so that milestones no longer have that impact on you. Because ultimately, all that really happened was you said you were going to achieve something by a certain point and you didn't. That's it. Everything else is like your creation. Everything else is what you made a story about. And that story is negotiable. That story can be changed. So what those of us committed to an at-cause life, a life where we are the cause, creating the life we want, for those of us that are committed to living that way and to transformation and to leadership, we notice what shows up and then we bring that to our coach. So now we've kind of got this laid out, I can come to Tara's question, which is like, let's say, Adam, that you get 75% of what you declared by when you declared it inside of some project. What would you do next? So let's imagine that I said, I'm going to write and publish. I'll have published a book by December 31st, 2023, by the end of this year. And then I play that all out on my project. I design that. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to like write every day to achieve this milestone. And then I'm going to have to like find a publisher at this point. I'm going to have to do this. Okay, got it. I've got some clear stuff I need to do. I can put it in my calendar. I can set reminders. I can do whatever. And I get to December 31st and I have a book that's 75% written. The rest is not written and I don't yet have a publisher. Adam, what do you do in that situation? So what I do, first of all, for me, my default would be to like kind of shrug my shoulders and be like, whatever. Fuck it. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to set this aside. I don't really want this that much. Does it really matter? I'm just going to do that human stuff. And I'm probably going to have like some feelings of like, I can't achieve what I want to achieve. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I'm weak. I'm impotent. I can't make myself do stuff. I'm irresponsible. All of my internal stories are going to come up. And then I'm going to bring that to my coach. And I'm going to share it with her. I'm going to say, hey, I set this goal and I didn't achieve it. And I'm feeling all of these sort of ways. And my coach is going to support me a few ways. The first thing is she's going to support me to to kind of complete on how it went. And by that, what I mean is she's going to support me to see like, oh, the way it went is just the way it went. She's going to support me to move beyond my stories, to let go of my stories about what happened, and to check in like, what would be an empowering belief to hold about the way this went? So my existing belief is sort of like, I didn't achieve the result, and that means I'm a failure. Not very empowering, right? And if every time you don't achieve a result, you're a failure, you're probably pretty soon going to stop declaring results. Instead, a more empowering context for me, a more powerful belief to live into and to live from, might be like, oh, I didn't achieve that result, and so there's something here for me to shift so that in the future I can achieve the results I declare. There's something here for me to notice, for me to look at. And I don't yet know what that thing is going to be. It might be like, oh, I'm setting my results way too ambitiously, and I'm not taking into account my own energy. I'm not taking into account the other stuff that I'm up to. Okay, great. In the future, I might need to set my results further up. Or it might be like, what there is for me to do is to like hold this like, oh, this is just not actually as important to me as I thought it was. And I can create a different belief there. Whatever it happens to be, with that work with my coach, what's going to happen is I'm going to start to see the opportunities to acknowledge the work I did do. I'm going to start to see the opportunities to see where I got stopped, free of my story about getting stopped, meaning I can start to see like, oh, I just got really busy with this other stuff and I let that other thing sidetrack me. And I can see that without layering on top, and that means you suck, and that means you're responsible, and that means all of that other stuff. So I can take that story and set it aside so that I can just be with the facts and just start to learn from them. So when I don't achieve a milestone like this, it's an opportunity for me to study myself and to really notice like, oh, how did this go? What got in the way? What stopped me? Where did I get, like, what are the sort of energetic things that stop me? Is it like other people needing support? Is it other projects I have that are like just less scary for me to take on, that I have less resistance to, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the first thing I'm going to do with my coach, is get complete on how it went. And then from there, we're going to take a look at, okay, given the way it went, what is there to do from here? And once I'm complete, on the other side of that, there's usually opportunities for me to, like, once I get complete and really can see what happened, how it went, and set aside my story, it usually becomes pretty clear what there is to do next. It might be like, oh, my fear about asking people for support got in the way. And I had that on my list. I had that on my calendar every single day. I just didn't do it. Okay, got it. What support do I need from my coach to overcome that fear, to not have that fear stop me? Maybe it's a new story about my fear, what it means. Maybe it's a new story about asking for support. Maybe that's the opportunity for me to create the breakthrough. Maybe it's something different entirely. Maybe it's that I want to create this project without needing any support. All of these are options. And all of these options come on the table after I get complete about how it went. What most of us try to do in our lives is we set a declaration, a milestone, we get there, we didn't achieve it, and that's almost inevitable if you're going for a breakthrough result. At first, when you go through a breakthrough result, you're probably going to fail. If you just achieved it, it probably wasn't a breakthrough result. It probably didn't require any shift for you. There's no breakdown required to create the breakthrough on the other side. Daniel, I see what you wrote, so I'm going to come to that in a sec. So we kind of like, oh, I don't like that this went this way. And then rather than really getting complete, like rather than sitting in that moment and really getting complete on how it did, we go, okay, got it. I'm fine the way it went. Now let's look to the future. And then we try to plan from there. And because we can't see that we're actually bypassing our work, what ends up happening is that we design the future out of a reaction to the past. And so that's what's happening when we're resistant to projects. In the past, when I set a project for myself, I felt really bad. So in the future, I'm not going to set any more projects. You can do that, but what you're doing is you're denying yourself the opportunity to work and get supported in a structure. It'd be like if someone said, in the past, I fell off scaffolding and that really hurt. And so in the future, I'm never going to work with scaffolding ever again. Well, that would be okay. That would be a choice, but you're really going to make an imposition on your ability to build houses. You're probably going to end up becoming someone who's really fixated on building ranchers for people. I really like ranchers. It's just who I am. It's not who you are. It's who you've become out of a reaction to that fear of what happens when you get on scaffolding. And so what there really is to take on is scaffolding and your relationship to it. Get complete on how it went. Oh, I can see from my completion that the issue isn't scaffolding. It's that I was unwilling to wear safety gear. Okay, got it. Maybe I take another swing. So these sort of things they become available to us once we get supported to set aside our story. Once we get supported to start to look at things in a different light, a light that doesn't require we contract away from some of the stuff that's available in life, like structure, like projects, like scaffolding. Hey, Monica, we're going to hit up your cynicism question in a sec. Tara's just saying, that's so good. I like to jump over completion and directly into fixing instead of seeing what happened as simply what happened and then asking myself what's next from my heart. Most of us that have achieved a degree of success in our life are the way Tara's describing, which is we don't like to look at the past. We don't like to take on getting complete on how it went because that feels to us like just kind of wallowing in it. Oh, it feels so bad that I didn't achieve this milestone. I don't want to spend any more time here. Let me just fix this. And so those of us that have enjoyed a degree of success, that are reliable to create results and stuff, we're very quick to like jump into like, let's fix this, let's do the next thing. And so what you end up having is people like don't achieve their milestone, and then what they do is they're like, I'll just do it harder. Or like, oh, it didn't happen, but the reason it didn't happen is because I didn't grind enough. And so what I need to do in the future is grind even more. And what that tends to cause in your life is whatever had you fail the milestone, you're now just trying to overcome with willpower. And there's not going to be any breakthrough down that path. And so from our unwillingness to stand and to kind of almost feel a little bit like we're not moving forward, when you're getting complete, it feels a bit that way because you're letting go of taking on the next action for the moment so you can really look at what happened in the past. And so that can feel like, this isn't productive. I feel bad. I feel like I'm layering even more not doing on top of the not doing I already did. And as a result of that, we kind of rush into the next thing, thinking we're being productive, when actually what we're doing is just recreating the existing problem over and over again. And so this is why what happens is people do this, create the same problem. Okay, I'm going to try even harder, maybe achieve some degree of success, but it's not a breakthrough. And so they achieve that success on the back of feeling stressed out and urgency and like it's a grind. And then they might even achieve the result they declared, but they're like, fuck that, I'm not doing that again. That sucked. I felt horrible. I didn't like it. I'm not going to work with projects. And then we get back into that same place. I'm not going to use scaffolding. In the coaching profession, this is all over the place. And what happens there is you end up with a lot of coaches not doing their own work and having gone through this process and then having concluded eventually, projects aren't for me. And so what they do is they're now living their life in this sort of like float in the water, wait to see what comes downstream to you. And if you like it, grab it, like surrender, but an at the effect version of surrender. We'll just see what happens. And then they start to coach other people and they veer people away from projects. And what this ironically does is it stops people from creating the breakthrough. Your breakthrough will come by going towards what you have resistance towards. That doesn't mean you should be like, I'm scared to get punched in the face, so I'm going to run and start a fight and get punched in the face. You could do that. What we want you to do is get clear of what you really want in your life and would be willing to go after regardless of what you had to take on. And then as you go towards that thing, the thing that you're resistant to is going to show up. And that's the moment when you get to take it on with your coach. So the way this occurs in the coaching, the leadership profession is a lot of talk about being as opposed to doing. We only coach who you're being. We never look at what you're doing. Or we only coach the soul line, not the goal line. And we need both of those. Both of those are integral. Without the structure of a project, without the structure of a milestone, without the structure of you making a declaration, you never have to come to that moment of confrontation. And if you never come to that moment of confrontation, we can talk about your being all day long, but we're going to get into pretty masturbatory conversations. Those conversations they often sound sort of like, hey coach, I feel kind of guilty because I'm not really doing that much. And I feel like it's all fine, but I feel like there's more I should do, but help me not feel so guilty about not doing so much. And often that conversation's coming up because the person has not created the breakthrough. to really put some skin in the game for themselves that would have them addressing their resistance and then starting to create what they really want to create in their life. So they're feeling this low grade guilt, and that's really just their heart saying, hey, there's more we want to be doing. And it's just easier for them to feel that as guilt than it is for them to feel like, oh, I'm not actually creating what I want to create because I'm kind of scared and resistant to, making a declaration, doing that sort of stuff. So that's how it would go for me. I would have resistance. I would want to talk about something different. I would get into a conversation with my coach. I would be resistant. I would want to cancel that conversation with my coach. Many times before my coaching calls, I'm like, maybe I should just cancel. And sometimes I have. But for the most part, I do my best to get on that call. And it's tough. It's not that I don't believe in coaching. In fact, I'm a real advocate for it. Hopefully, It's just that I'm a human. And our humanity never leaves us. We don't become this being of spiritual light that doesn't have any issue. We just become a little bit better at catching our humanity. We become a little more experienced in how things go when we don't choose into the support, and we become a little better at choosing out of our resistance and back into the structure that supports us to move through our fear, move through our resistance. And so that's what I try to do in my own life, is notice when that's showing up, bring it forward to my coach. I can usually tell when I'm avoiding that because my coaching conversations kind of feel a little lackluster. They kind of feel a little like I'm not really sure what to bring, and they kind of feel sometimes like we're talking in circles. That's usually when I'm avoiding something underneath. The conversation's sort of talking in circles because we're not actually speaking to the very thing that's there for me to get supported with. I wish it was easier. I wish it was just like, yeah, I've been working with a coach for just shy of 15 years, and now I just choose in every time, and I never have resistance, and you just got to show up and do your projects. But that's not really how it is for me. I'm too human for that. And Tara says, thank you, Adam. But between this and the call review and the forage, it appears as though this work is life-changing. Wild, huh? Yeah, that's what I love about this work, is it's miraculous. And it's miraculous in the sense that it makes what was previously impossible in our lives possible. So my, an easy example of that would be I went back and looked at my old, my first ever project form, with the first coach I ever worked with. And it was sort of work with 30 clients for a year at a time. And I was saying 30 clients, which if you think about it, is just it's a lot of energy to hold. But I was wanting to work with 30 clients over the course of a year because that was all that I could see in terms of possibility. Charging the rates I charged, 65, 100K to work one-on-one, was impossible. There was no way that was a reality. And it wasn't that's impossible. It was just that won't happen. So thanks for your thoughts, coach, but can we go back here to the real world where people are willing to pay $100 for a coaching conversation, tops? And I'm a new coach, so we'll say they're going to pay $25. So $100 a month, 30 clients, $3,000. Okay, I could live on that. That would be $36,000. That's what I made in my first job out of university. Okay, great. I can do that. And through all the support with my coach, through the process I'm describing, through being brought into confrontation with my fear, that stuff started to get broken up. And I started to create the breakthroughs that allowed that possibility that I live into now to actually exist. And that's miraculous. It's miraculous in the sense, not the way we sometimes use it, where we're this tiramisu is miraculous. Or I got that shot in pickleball and it was miraculous. Or even I got that raise at my job and I didn't think I was going to get it. That was miraculous. Not that kind of miraculous, literal miracles. That's what this work entails. That's what it provides when we're willing to go through those fires and face our resistance. And finally, what I want to finish on this with, and then I'll come to what you wrote, Daniel, is it would be nice if we could just notice our resistance in the moment and then choose something different. And that's the fantasy that a lot of leaders not working with their own coaches and leaders operate under, is oh yeah, I can catch, I've just read a lot of books, I've attended a lot of training, I'm just really good at catching my resistance. But that's not real. That's not how it works, because your resistance functions as a part of your blind spot, your psychic or egoic blind spot. your energetic blind spot, your being, your ontological blind spot. And so you won't be able to see when you're resistant. It will look and sound to your mind, to yourself in the moment, like the right thing to do. So like Tara's describing for us, yeah, I didn't achieve that milestone, but I got to get on the horse and I got to like just do another one and I got to get through this. Oh my gosh. No. But that in the moment will occur perfectly like the right decision. And you will even fight with people that are like, hey, it seems like you might benefit from slowing down here. And so this is why coaching is such a valuable profession, such a valuable thing to engage with, is because it stops you from trying to do the impossible. It takes the impossible out of your hands, which is trying to see your own blind spot. It alleviates you from that burden. And it is a burden. It's a burden that we can't really overcome on our own. It doesn't mean that you can't live a great life without support. I don't want to suggest that. It just means you're always going to be tripping over your own blind spots to some extent, because that's the nature of a blind spot. Have a bit of tea here. Monica's saying that what I was describing there was like her coaching call this morning with her coach. So what do you think the thing was, Monica, that you were avoiding? What do you think the circular thing, what was that over top of, do you think? Let's pour a little more tea in here. I got to put my tea down. I got to pour it with my right hand instead of my left because of this mic setup. Might be nice for me to get a proper swinging arm. The trouble with those is they're kind of ugly, and I don't like the ugliness of my office. So we work with it. So Daniel, you wrote, not to go off on a tangent, but how do you get over rejection and setbacks when we're pre-programmed to perform slot machine commitment to personal productivity? Well, basically the way I described. I've worked with a great coach. I highly recommend people seek out a great coach. And if you're like, all the great coaches cost too much, then find a great coach that doesn't cost too much, because it's not true. That's just your story. There's many, many, many great coaches. I train many of them in the Forge that don't charge a lot of money. And so, but Daniel's really hitting the nail on the head here, which is like, we're pre-programmed. The story we've learned about not achieving a goal is that it means something about us and it means something crappy about us. And so it's a value, I think, for us to recognize, oh, that's going to be my default programming. That's going to be how I operate, is that as soon as I come into confrontation, as soon as I don't achieve this, I'm going to feel probably bad. I'm going to make up a shitty story about myself. And so the way we work with that is we work with our coach. And our coach supports us by checking in with our projects. Hey, how's that going? Are you moving towards that? Is there anything we need to talk about? Or when the conversation is kind of circular, hey, seems like the conversation is a bit circular. Is there anything we're not talking about? Or does this feel circular to you? Maybe it doesn't. Yeah, it does. Super circular. Great. So what's the thing we're not touching on? So I really think coaching is the solution to this. And the way it's the solution to this is that instead of trying to solve it, it just helps us look at it. And that's the miracle. Oh, Daniel says, I already addressed it. Okay, great. And Monica's saying, my belief is that I wasn't coachable. I can solve my own problems. I was on top of not wanting to see a pattern, but the pattern showed up to the call. To say more would be TMI at this point. Thanks for sharing what you did. I really get it. Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for being a coach in her work. I really want to acknowledge you, Monica, and everyone commenting here. But Monica, I really want to acknowledge you for having a coach and for bringing this forward and for giving yourself that gift. And then through giving yourself that gift, for giving that gift to the people that you lead and that you coach. It's so beautiful. I need to breathe. So let's do that. I love your coach too. I know Monica's coach and she's amazing. What I'm recalling in this moment is a quote you've heard me say probably a number of times, which is a teacher I work with told me that being a medicine man, a medicine woman, a medicine person, being a curandero, a healer, is not about healing other people. It's about healing ourselves. And as we do so, the rest of life and the work to do unfolds. And I find the best way I can support the healing of other people is to be actively, almost aggressively, but very committedly engaged in my own healing and put my attention there. And then what I can do is I can share what I'm getting for myself. And that's always, in my experience, that's always the best way for people to learn, is when I let go of trying to teach them something and I instead just share what I'm discovering. One of my teachers the other day, on Wednesday evening, I was working with him, and he just shared like, well, for me, in my own experience, and as soon as he said that, I could listen a little bit more easily, because it was no longer, here's what you should do, Adam. It was just him generously sharing his own process. And when we don't give ourselves the gift of a coach, a leader, even a teacher of our own, we kind of rob. We can try to do what I'm describing, but the being is missing, because you're not actively engaging with the process of learning yourself. You're just trying to teach, and then trying to like, okay, great. The best way to teach is to share my experience. So I'll share my experience, but what's being missed is that you're not engaging with your own version of that. You're trying to give people something. You're not actively engaging with yourself, and that doesn't work. Sometimes I'll post what I'm learning on social media or my blog, or wherever it happens to be. Like, for example, I wrote a post about what I've been learning and healing with regards to my relationship to food and stimulating myself. I move away from the mic to breathe. Y'all remember Tay Chocolate Rain? He said that in his video. So I wrote this post, and I kind of broke down, like, here's what I noticed. Like, first I let go of the stimulation. Then I feel boredom. Then I feel this. Then I feel this. And then underneath all of that, I felt sadness and loneliness. And someone came in and was like, oh, that's so great. Thank you for sharing. There's actually one more piece you're missing. And that is that underneath all of this is energy and blah, 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 blah. And their intention is good. Like, they're doing that from a well-meaning place. But what they don't realize is they're stepping on someone's process. Anytime we tell people, oh, actually, there's more to it than that, we're actually stepping on their process. And who knows, right? For them, perhaps that was their truth. For me, that's not currently my truth. And maybe I'll come to that truth, but we don't know. Perhaps not. Perhaps what I have to learn is what I've described, and that's that. And so I think it's really valuable to notice the times when we're trying to like help people go further, and when we catch that, to step back away from it, because it's actually, all you really do is you create defensiveness. You diminish their own process. You're kind of making it smaller. Oh, that's cool what you created, but there's actually a better version. And it's tricky. There's a lot of this in social media because we love to be right and we love to have value. But instead, more valuable always, in my experience or my learning for myself, what I've gotten for myself is, that's the most powerful way we can share with people. And it's so generous because it's sharing your experience free of needing them to do anything with it. The more we can just share, like, here's what I've learned, and let them do whatever they want with it and create their own experience and their own process, that's truly generous, in a remarkably generous way. Great question, Tara. Thank you for bringing that. All right, well, we've got Monica here, so let's go to cynicism. I love this piece that you brought, Monica. Monica wrote, cynicism. Can you talk about cynicism? What are the typical reasons why people choose to be cynical? What does this get them out of? What does it do for them? What does it keep them from? And what kind of person, essence-wise, might we see as being cynical? And she's saying, I'm practicing looking for the light. So thank you for practicing that. So I have a lot of experience with cynicism because that was my path, and still is to some extent. I would say that my journey through it begins with like the light that I bring, that is brilliance. So my brilliance, like when that's being expressed, is like, part of that is like my ability to kind of take complicated concepts and understand them in a way that I can then communicate them, that are clear. I can break complexity down into clarity. My brilliance is like, in part, it enables me, like part of the expression of brilliance is the ability to see order amidst the chaos, to make sense of stuff, and to like line things up, and to understand how this leads to that, leads to this, leads to that. And so people with brilliance are very good at like predicting how things are going to go. And one of the things that happens is that people with a lot of brilliance, we tend to learn early on that trust is costly. And that's not something unique to brilliance. It's a fact everywhere. Trust is costly. To trust someone sets you up for the potential for betrayal. If you don't trust anyone, you can't be betrayed. Love is also costly. We can argue, I would argue, the rewards that we get from trust and love outweigh the costs. But we don't always experience it that way in the short term. And where we create strategies, patterns, and lessons for ourselves and stories and beliefs happen in the short term, in the immediacy of our hurt. And so growing up, I practiced trusting inadvertently because that's what kids do, right? As a child, you don't think about this stuff. You just trust your parent, your guardian, the kids at school, your teachers. And then you later on discover like trusting them meant you got a pea-filled water balloon thrown at you by your dad, I guess. or you got hurt physically or emotionally or whatever. And so the way Brilliance learns to mitigate for the problem of trust is to stop trusting and instead to rely on prediction. I'm not going to trust people. I'm just going to figure out, I'm going to get out in front of everything, and then I can predict things, and then I can run a high level cost risk benefit analysis, risk reward analysis, and then make the best decision every single time. And so what starts to happen is that trust falls away. The muscle of trust becomes atrophied. And instead, what is replaced is the muscle of understanding, figuring out, predicting, managing, and all of that sort of stuff. So we move from the realm of the heart, which is where trust lies, to the realm of the mind, which is where prediction and all of that lies. Brilliance exists throughout. Brilliance exists in your heart. But what happens is these people start to express, Adam Quiney, other people like him, start to express their brilliance entirely through their mind. So we become more and more attuned to our mind. And simultaneous to that, we're raised by parents that have similar light to us, that have similar essence. Both my parents are very brilliant. And you've probably all heard me say this before. My dad, one of the things I remember him saying a lot and being in an argument with him about is that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So that is the embodiment of trust or of distrust, right? Anytime someone's saying that they're going to give you something for free, distrust that. Be skeptical. I almost said sextable. Skeptical. Be skeptical of that. Don't trust it. Look for the angle. There's always an angle. And so this initial skepticism over time becomes cynicism. Skepticism is kind of like, the more I work with these energies, the more I think they're really quite similar. But if we want to distinguish them, skepticism is kind of like, in this moment, you were telling me you've built a perpetual motion machine. I'm a little skeptical. Do you have evidence to back that up? Does the evidence meet our standards of evidence? That's going against the very fundamental laws of our universe, the law of entropy. And you're saying you've overcome that. I'm going to cock my eyebrow and I'm going to wait to see, do you have more evidence for me? Cynicism is kind of when that thing in the moment of being skeptical becomes a worldview and a lens through which we receive the entire world. And I think it's kind of a natural progression. So it'd be sort of like how coldness, like I'm cold towards other people, coldness leads to callousness, leads to cruelty, and all begins from love. We could draw that out, but that's a different conversation. If you guys want me to, let me know and I'll do so. So skepticism tends towards cynicism as you practice it more and more, because whatever you practice becomes more and more your lens, and then that lens filters what you receive from the world and what you put into the world. And so over time, you lend towards cynicism. So that is the process happening in the background over decades as people age and learn and practice these approaches, these strategies. And then you as a leader or a coach have them come to you at the age of 35, 40, 55, whatever, where this has become really, really well-worn territory. This is no longer like a strategy they're doing sometimes. It's the way they relate to the world, themselves, and other people. And so it becomes their worldview. So that's how cynicism gets created, or at least that's how I've witnessed it get created. It's often from brilliance. It tends to be a big survival mechanism of brilliance. And I'm going to just look here. Let's bring out our Bible. Yeah, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? And let's look up. I'm going to look up cynicism in our index. I think it's just the coolest thing in the world that I created an index. First, we can look to our quick reference guide, which is at the back. And under brilliance, it lists the shadow aspects. Under brilliance, the overexpressing shadow aspect is called condescending and skeptical. Right? So you can see right there, And then the obvious fix to that is like, sell your Ferrari and become a monk. The other one would be like, believe everything. Do we have cynicism in here? Yeah, cynical. And also that points us to spirit and divinity. So we should look that up and see. So people with a lot of spirit and a lot of divinity as part of their light can, their under expressing shadow, where they learn to turn that light down, can become what is called the faithless cynic. So I'm just going to read a little bit from that side too, so we can get this from Brilliance as well as from spiritual and divinity. So this is from Who Do You Think You Are? Page 317, Spirit Cynic, Spirit Divinity as the light. Faithless cynic. Bitten one too many times by the cruelty of fate and humanity, you disavow the promise of spirit and dive headfirst into profane cynicism. Sure, it's a cruel world, but you expect it to be, and you find ways to excel in that acceptance. The moments when the clouds do part and sun shines through are temporary, and you know this better than anyone. You give up the hope of transcendence, trading it in for faithless cynicism. Life becomes a vicious, cruel world, but you aren't overly hurt by that fact. Rather, you accept it and excel. Having shrugged away spirit, you decide the way to get ahead is through wealth, success, and material possessions. These things provide you with relatively shallow, short-term fulfillment, but hey, you're a success now and you get results, even if life now feels a little gray and emotionless. So what happens there is that people who are spirit and divinity, they can see the possibility, the promise of spirit. They can see like, oh, we could all love one another, we could all blah, blah, blah. But that becomes very painful to hold in a world where we're not yet there. And so time and time again, they embrace the promise of God, spirit, Yahweh, this flying spaghetti monster, maybe they're a Pastafarian, whatever it is. And they start to like, they can't keep holding that whilst being with the cruelty that they perceive in the world, the profanity, the lack of morality, all of that sort of stuff. And so in that tension, they say, fuck this spirit bullshit. People are fucking jerks, and that's the way it is, and I'm not going to keep holding this thing. And so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to, you know, if you can't beat them, join them and be better at their game than they are. And so that's how spirit finds its way to cynicism. Just going to have a sip of tea, and then we'll talk about your questions, Monica. I see your question, Monica. I'm going to come to that at the end here. So Monica says, what are the typical reasons people choose to be cynical? Because it's safe. That's the big one, and pretty much always the case. And like the sort of throwaway answer is because they're afraid, right? But we want to do better than just that, because the reason we do anything shitty is because we're afraid. But just labeling it fear doesn't really give us much to get our hands around. You know, it's too big and nebulous. So it's because they have learned at some point to distrust. They've learned to not trust people because they got harmed in the past for trusting. Or they've learned that the promise of spirit is unreal and is a lie, and that it will break your heart over and over and over again. And they've learned, rather than learn how to heal from heartbreak, like really heal from heartbreak, and to deepen into heartbreak, they've learned to stop allowing heartbreak. So that's mostly what's happening, is like these people have learned how to avoid the pain of having their heart broken, either through betrayal of trust or betrayal of the possibility of spirit. They've learned, I don't like that, and so I'm going to eliminate the possibility of it occurring. And if you're very, very cynical in the world, you're not going to trust anyone. You're certainly not going to trust spirit. You're certainly, probably, almost certainly not going to have any relationship to God or spirit or anything like that. And as a result, it's very hard for you to get hurt by those things. And so that's typically why we become cynical, because it's safe. It keeps us protected. What does this get us out of? It gets us out of having to trust. It gets us out of the risk of being betrayed. It gets us out of having our hopes brought up and then having them dashed against the rocks, which is the cost of having hope. If you hope for something, you must be willing to have that hope dashed. It comes with the territory. What does it do for them? It keeps them safe. And it allows the world to be manageable and predictable. My book just fell down over there. Manageable, predictable, linear, figure-outable, determinative, predictable. And that's very, very safe. But what does it keep them from? It keeps them from a world where miracles can happen. It keeps them from a world where there is magic. It keeps them from a world that's alive with color. And it keeps them from creating any kind of results in their life that would require relying on spirit. It would require relying on other people. So I'll give you the simplest example of my own life. And I think I've shared the story many, many times, but it's a good one for this. For the first probably 8 years of my practice, maybe 9, I did the blue collar work of coaching, so to speak, meaning I I had a list of people that I'm in conversation with. And if that list started, like if my pipeline started to shrink, then I would take action to make sure I got into more. I would go to a networking event. I would reach out to people. I would start conversations on Facebook. I would do all of that stuff. And that was really reliable to help me make sure my practice was always working with new people. I was bringing people through the pipeline, blah, 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 blah. The trouble with that is that it was like a grind. That's how I experienced it. At first, I didn't. At first, I was like, this is awesome. I'm actually able to be an entrepreneur. I never in a million years related to myself that way. That was miraculous at the time. But then it started to be a grind. And I was like, oh, I always have to be doing more. And I don't frankly enjoy a lot of this stuff. It's not really what I want to be spending my time doing. And so I worked a lot with my coach to create breakthroughs in my relationship with other people, getting supported, and my relationship with spirit. Those breakthroughs with spirit involved like recovery work, because recovery, 12-step work, has a lot about your relationship to spirit. I worked with shamanistic people, shamans, ayahuasca, and started to embrace, just like I started to read a lot about spirit. I started to really like pray a lot more, not to like Jesus or God, because that's not my particular path for spirit, but just to spirit in general. I started to practice like turning stuff over to spirit as a practice, not as a, like I did it, it didn't work, but as like, I'm going to make part of my practice to like, spirit, I don't know what to do with this. I'm going to hand this over to you. And as I did that, what started to become available to me was that I didn't have to chase people. I didn't have to make stuff happen. It just happened. Clients just showed up. People just found me. And I'd be like, how did you find me? They'd be like, oh, I saw a video of yours on a thing somewhere that someone else posted on some other thing somewhere else. And then so I found you. And I'm like, that's cool. I had nothing to do with that. And that was very scary to my cynic because it's not predictable. That's sort of like, okay, random chance, I guess. But that's what becomes available from letting go of our cynicism, is that we can start to trust the work that we've done. We can start to trust our ripples out into the ocean of humanity and that they'll come back to us. And we can start to let go of all the hustle and the grind and the hashtag billionaire mindset, yo. Get up at 5 and work till 9. That stuff's horrible. No desire for that. Enjoy your billions, people. Sorry, I have an opinion about that stuff. Maybe we'll talk about it later. I could let go of all that. And as long as I was stuck and rooted in my cynicism, none of that was available. None of that exists as a possibility. And consequently, a lot of the life I get to live now, that's very free, very beautiful, still has plenty of sadness and all of that stuff, because that's part of being a human. But that life that I have now was not available there. And so that's what these people are often missing out on, is the opportunity to create results that would be beyond what they can create under their own steam and inside their own predictability. Okay, so I think that is everything to say about that. Let's see what you wrote here, Monica. You said, it seems like this lack of trust may lead to being at the effect versus at cause. Would I agree? Kind of. So it's an interesting thing, because being at cause means like what I declare I want, I am the one that can create it. So these people we're talking about with the cynicism, they can occur very responsible and at cause in their life, because they never set a goal that they cannot already predict how to get there. And so it looks very at cause. It's like, man, they set a goal and they achieve it, and they're super reliable for that. What they're unable to do is set a goal that they don't know how to achieve, because that would require a degree of trust. That would require a degree of turning over outside of their mind and trusting that there's a way to get there that they just can't yet see. And so if you sort of said something to them like, hey, you seem like a little bit at the effect of your life, or they would vociferously argue with you. Hell no, I hate victimhood. Can't stand it. The thought of that makes me sick. I am absolutely 100. In fact, I'm more at cause than these other people that make results and declarations that they don't yet know how to achieve. But what they cannot see is that it's like a bird trapped in an atrium. You know, like a beautiful building that has like we've got a building here called the atrium. It has like trees growing in it, nice, gorgeous glass roof, very, very tall, like 5 stories. It's beautiful to be inside. And there's sometimes birds in there because they've got automatic doors, birds fly in. And the trees have enough food for the birds and blah, 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 blah. But the trouble is that bird is forever trapped in the atrium. And it's safe, and they can do that, but they're missing on some part of life. And so these people that are cynical, their life typically feels a little bit gray. It typically feels lacking in color and like it's missing the magic that they remember having as a child. And this is why. Just like that bird longs to soar free in the sky and to like fly with the clouds and the thermals, and none of that can exist in the atrium. It's safe. They could make the argument, no, I'm living my best life, but there's something being missed. So kind of at the effect, kind of, but like they're at the effect, but in a way that's very hard for them to see. And I call this, the distinction I use for this is called empowered resignation. They're resigned that the world can only be this big. It can only exist as large as their atrium. So they're resigned to only those goals that they can predict and see how to get. And in that resignation, they are empowered. And it takes some work with these people to sort of like help them start to see possibility outside of that. Because people that are very cynical about possibility too. They can be very tough clients. Yeah. I love working with people like this because I know this so well because it can show up for me all the time. And even when I like go and experience like miracles working with plant medicine with my coach, it's not long, like usually 2 weeks before my mind and my fear are like, yeah, did that really happen? Can you know that that actually happened? Help me understand, blah, blah, blah. And it's dissecting the miracle that I got. And sure enough, the longer I hang out in that, the more the breakthrough that I created starts to wither away. So it's there for me too. When I get afraid, that can still show up. Okay, what do we want to talk about? David Medina asked us a bunch of good questions, so let's touch on some of those. So one he says is like, what are Ontology's origins? You know, who are the fathers, the mothers, the grandfathers, the taitas of coaching? Where did all these distinctions come from even before accomplishment coaching? So one, I've got a section in my book about this, the origins of this work, but I'll summarize it a little bit here. So in my understanding, like what I can see, the origins of ontology go back to like antiquities. Greek philosophers in the early days were asking questions like, what determines the being of something? Like, what makes a rock a rock? And we could argue like, well, it's the molecular shape. But then some things have a similar molecular shape but aren't a rock. There's something different. So how do we determine rockness? What is the study of that? And likewise, they would bring these questions to like people. What makes Socrates Socrates? Is it he ask questions? Well, Aristotle can also ask questions. So it can't just be that. So they started to look at like the heart of ontology being from a pretty scientific perspective. So they would be really kind of like the origins, I would say. And I'm sure this has been talked about even before that, but that's where like we first see this conversation start to show up. And I would say like the other really deep root of this work would be in Zen. Zen practice does not have all of the languaging. It's not as distinguished around this stuff. But if you read like the best book you can read if you're interested in Zen, it's a great book. And I recommend the audiobook. It's called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by, I think it's Shinru Suzuki. Rinpoche. I always get the name wrong because they're hard for me to pronounce. But that book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, is exquisite. And if you read that, you'll start to discover there's a lot of ontological work. And what Zen is all about is sitting in practice, sitting in meditative practice, and coming to an experience of yourself. And that's the heart of ontology. So that Zen and like antiquities, oops, hit my mic. Those like, there we go. Sorry guys, sorry for that feedback. Let me know if the feedback's still there. I think I fixed it. I can just suddenly hear it in my headphones. It was very unpleasant. So that I'll make smaller gestures. So that's like the two most prominent lineages I see. And if you look through like tantric work, if you study any of that, if you look through other lineages of like philosophy, you'll see ontology threaded throughout, but it's not quite labeled as prominently. And then we come to like the more modern taitas, the grandfathers and fathers, which would be Alan Watts, did a great deal of work bringing ontological work into the forefront. And the person that loved Alan Watts and studied with him a lot was Werner Erhard. Werner Erhard, the man who founded Landmark Forum and EST, and then the Being a Leader course, which Bay and I love and highly recommend. Werner took a lot of this stuff and put language around it, similar to what I've sought to do with this book, with Who Do You Think You Are? Because a lot of ontology, it kind of exists as a state of being as opposed to something we can talk about. And if you want to like learn about it, you it's almost like going and sitting in Zen. Like you learn it through the direct experience of it, and that's great. That's the most valuable way you can experience this. But I also think it's really valuable to be able to like, how do like in this conversation today, how do we get from brilliance to cynicism, and how does that all work? We can discover that through our own study of ourselves and other people. But if we can have some scaffolding laid out through a book like this, that can help us immensely. And so Werner Erhard played a huge role in doing that. He really brought ontological work into the forefront, and he did so in a way that put a lot of language around it and then also supported people to have the direct experience of that taking place in their lives. So Werner Erhard deserves a very, very prominent special mention. And then he trained a lot of people that have taken this work out into the world. He trained the founders of my lineage of work, Accomplishment Coaching. So primarily that'd be Christopher McAuliffe, and I believe Hans Phillips did work with Werner Erhard. And they took that and made it like, brought it into like a couple of things: a coaching program, a leadership development program, and a program that supported you to like learn how to bring this to other people as a profession, as a practice, as opposed to just something you do kind of inside of Landmark as a teacher. And then you have people like me who are doing their best to like continue to propagate this forward, but we're young, right? I'm green in the long run of things. So those are the fathers, the taitas, the grandfathers, the ancestors, the founders of this work. And then let's take a sip of tea together. Simultaneous sip. I got that from Scott Adams, who wrote Dilbert. He's such an interesting guy. Like, Scott Adams is a man who has a lot of brilliance and a lot of wit. He's very funny. I love Dilbert. I think it's a brilliant cartoon. His time is kind of past, but like still brilliant cartoon. And Scott Adams, I've listened to interviews, is very, very brilliant. And he has a lot of like righteousness and I would say arrogance, the over expressing aspects of brilliance. And a lot of that occurs like very, very strong right wing thought and like sort of denigration or derisiveness towards like liberal perspectives. And that's all fine, right? That's his journey. But he's an interesting character because he says some things where I'm just like, man, that's a brilliant man. And then I hear the other side and I'm like, and that is his survival mechanism right there. These people, I'm like, man, give me some time with them, bring them into the forge. I would really love to work with some of these people because the transformation would be miraculous, just absolutely miraculous. It's tough to bring those people in. And I've been studying NXIVM. I think I talked about this last week, really looking at it. And NXIVM's so fascinating because a lot of their technology, we could call it, mirrors what Bay and I and like some of the people that have taught us teach. They use terms like at cause. And I was listening to Keith Raniere, the man in jail for creating a sex cult and having women brand themselves and hold themselves out as slaves to masters, like crazy stuff. I was listening to an interview with him and he was sharing, someone was like, so you must be like completely unified. You must be like totally put together. And he was like, yeah, people think that, but I'm still human. And like, the goal of this work is not to become unified without any edges. The goal of this work is to have more joy. And I was listening to that and I was just struck by like the truth of that. I was like, man, that is so accurate. Like we're not trying to never have breakthroughs. We're not trying to like overcome once and for all our fear. We're trying to have more joy and access to our full expression in our life, which produces joy. And so NXIVM is so fascinating for me because like that guy, Keith, says things that are like brilliant. And I'm like, wow, I'm aligned with that. And then he creates this absolutely horrific thing where women were like on crazy diets trying to become super thin and like being given practices to try to seduce the leader of NXIVM, Keith, and branding them like just fucking crazy shit. And so the documentaries are really great. The Vow is one, and I think there's another one called Seduced. But I really want to study that guy and understand like what went wrong. Where did this go astray? And was it just that he was a sociopath and he just figured out like, I'm going to take from Landmark and Scientology and all these, Science of Mind, all these places, create a program and then manipulate towards this end? Or did he start with genuine good thoughts and like fall off the train and like, because he wasn't working with his own teachers, get into the state of mind of like, no, like got hooked by his ego? I don't know. It's very, very fascinating to me. And I'm cautious as I study it because I can see a lot of beauty in what he taught. And I can also see the absolute harm. And so I want to be cautious about like repeating stuff that, it's sort of like I wouldn't go state Hitler quotes, even if Hitler, just like anyone, said some things at times that weren't, that had relevance and bearing and were intelligent. We have to be able to hold that people who commit evil in the world are still capable of goodness, because otherwise what we do is we categorize good person, bad person, and that's where our ego gets the best of us, because we put ourselves in the good person, and then we can no longer see our own propensity and possibility to commit evil. So it's a very fascinating area that I'm stepping in lightly. Okay. Adam, for your live, David asked another great question. Have you ever had experience with team members, leaders, CEOs, etc., where they have had coaching, but they still relate to it as an on a need to have basis? So this is our taking support as needed versus committing to being supported. How have you navigated inviting them to an ongoing basis? I notice it takes vulnerability and intimacy to create that conversation. Have you noticed resistance from them to go or stay in the conversation? Could you speak to reasons on why these people don't continue with coaching if they have experienced it before? So there's a few parts here. So the default in our lives is to ask for and receive support on an as needed basis. Meaning when things are really rough, I will go and get support, right? I'll see my counselor until I overcome this, and then I'm good. And I'll go to my leader when I have a problem, and then I won't go to my leader until the next problem shows up. And I'll ask my parents for help until we overcome that, and then not. And through that context, if I'm actively, ongoingly getting supported, like by my parents, something's wrong with me. So that's our context for support, generally speaking. And transformational work exists outside of that context. Transformational work, the context we have is that to live a big life requires ongoing support. Period. And it's not weak, it is a commitment to live a really big life. So let me just get my thoughts together here. So because we have that disempowering context in which we hold support, what happens is we end up living the kind of lives that we can live that are available from that degree of support. So what that means is I'm not going to play a game in my life that I'm going to fail at. Sorry, let me word this a bit differently. There is a certain degree of results and commitment and like living into my life that I can only continue to play if I engage with ongoing support. Because our default context is that means something's wrong with you, and because we only, in general, seek out support when we need it, we play a kind of life that's commensurate with that. So I'm not going to go after results that would be impossible unless I was ongoingly getting supported. I'm going to go after the kind of results that I can get and manage my way towards with as needed support. And so this is where a lot of people kind of live their lives. And so when they come to someone like me, when people will come to me sometimes and they'll be like, hey, I'm looking for a coach, things are just really rough right now and I just want to overcome them. Or like I'm having some issues in my relationship, and so can you help me overcome them? And in the early days of work, like my work, I would work with people inside containers. Initially, the minimum commitment was 3 months and then 6 months. And that kind of container supported that kind of work, right? 3 months, great. That should be enough time for me to create the breakthrough, overcome this issue in my relationship. Perfect. And so what would happen is that our work would be fairly dissatisfying because people would show up like, I need to overcome this problem. They're kind of looking to like just address the problem. And they're not really looking to like the deeper ontological experience of their life. And they're not really looking to like how what's showing up is really a manifestation of like, get this mustache better, really a manifestation of something deeper. And so over time, first of all, I would also say like that coaching was kind of dissatisfying for me because we were doing a lot of symptom fixing, trying to fix the symptoms on the surface. And over time, I shifted to like a year-long commitment and a 6-month commitment, but I started to find even 6 months was not really doing it for me. And the way that I noticed 6 months would work is that people would have this commitment in place, and then they would be going towards, we'd be like looking at the thing in their way. And they would get to about the 5-month mark, which is usually where you get to the point where you're like, fuck it. The old stuff I'm doing isn't working, and I'm tired, and it's not working, and I keep saying I'm going to create a new result. That's not working either. Fuck this, right? It's the surrender moment, the fuck it moment. Super important moment for breakthroughs, because that's the moment of breakdown. And at the 5-month mark of a 6-month commitment, what I noticed people would do is they'd look out to the future and they'd conclude, I've only got 1 more month. So fuck it, but like, all right, we'll just dial it in. They weren't actively thinking that way, but that was energetically what was happening for them. I'll just show up for 1 more month, I'll suffer through it, and then we'll be done. And so that opportunity at that 5-month mark, that breakthrough moment where finally they're letting go of the old ways of being, that was lost because they would just crawl through the finish line. At a year-long contract, 5 months in, they hit the fuck it point at around the same time, usually a little sooner actually, and they're like, there's no way I'm gonna slog through 7 more months. That's not gonna work for me. I'm not doing that. And so instead of just deciding they're gonna crawl through, they would bring this forward as a conversation. Adam, this isn't working. Adam, I think maybe we need to change things. Adam, I think I need to quit. Whatever it happens to sound like. That's the most important moment of breakthrough work. Because now they're bringing that conversation, we can look to what's happening instead of them operating over top of it and just suffering through. So I came to this point where I decided I'm not gonna work with people for 6 months. It's a year. If you want to work with me, it's a year. And I started to stand for that. What I mean by that is I didn't offer 6 months anymore. Rarely, with a client who's really committed and who enrolls me in that possibility, who brings it forward herself or their self, I'll go along with it. But for the most part, I just don't offer it because of what I'm sharing. And what I found is that in a year-long agreement, they can no longer really engage with coaching on an as-needed basis. I am offering something that to engage with requires that for a year of your life, you commit to support ongoingly. And so that's the first thing, David, to your question, like, how have you navigated inviting them to an ongoing basis of support? It's what I offer. I stand in that place. I bring that, I work in my own life with that. Like I work with my coach. I work with plant medicine. I work with my teachers ongoingly, even and especially when there's nothing up for me, especially when there's nothing up for me. And so that's the first thing is that just what I offer is a stand for the world to come and engage at that way. And when people have questions about that, I explain it this way. I share these sort of things. And then if they're still like, well, I don't know, what I say is like, well, let's talk about that. Like, it sounds like what's showing up is that you're worried you'll run out of things to work on. They'd be like, yeah, kind of. Like, there's just this one thing. And so I would share with them like, okay, got it. Well, if there's just one thing, maybe I'm not the coach for you. Like, if you're just looking to like fix a thing in your life, I'm going to drive you nuts. Because the work with me is about fundamentally changing the way you show up in your life, shifting the underlying foundations upon which everything you do rests. And if we change that, one thing isn't going to change. Your whole life's going to change. You're going to feel more expressed, better. And a lot of the stuff that you're worried about symptomatically, that's just going to dissolve because you've changed the way you be. So if you're not interested in that, we shouldn't work together. But if you're curious about that, I can explain the difference here so that you can understand what is on offer. And usually people are curious, and that's where I would explain that distinction. And then if they have resistance or fear or concern about it, then we can address that. Oh, okay, got it. Well, I've got some concerns, like just that I don't know what I would even work on. And when that's coming up, the thing I want to look to for them is like, what's the result they want that they're not reliable to generate under their own steam? What is that? What does that look like? And my goal is like to discover in partnership with them a year out, what would be a miraculous result for you? And the reason it needs to be miraculous is because if it's sort of like I would get a 10% raise at work and people would start smiling at me more, they can do that on their own. And so if we make that the goal they're going for, they're very quickly going to become dissatisfied with the coaching because they don't need it. So most of us are living our lives aiming towards stuff that doesn't require ongoing support. Those of us committed to transformational work, we are aiming to create results and things in our lives that require ongoing support, that would be impossible without ongoing support. So it's about playing a really, really big game. And so whenever I'm bringing that conversation to people, that's where I'm looking. Like, is there a big game on the table? This is the third time in a row you've shown up and you don't have anything to bring and you're not sure and everything's all good. Maybe that's just where you want to be. Or maybe it's that you're not really like, do you have something that really matters to you that you're going towards? And then we would look through that lens. So that's what I do with that. Consequently, interestingly, this piece ties in very closely with Monica's piece on cynicism. The people that are cynical tend to not really care about ongoing support because they don't need it, because they're living lives that don't really require much out of their control. So you can see this a lot there. Okay. We got two more, and then I think we're going to wind down. These are from Tibby. Thank you, Tibby, for your questions. So the first one is, Tibby says, in one of your episodes, you speak about accountability and creating consequences in leadership. I'd love to hear how you support people in coaching. How do you help them hold themselves accountable when you cannot create consequences? Do you simply ask them to create their own consequences? Yeah, kind of. So in coaching and leadership work, leadership's a little different because in leadership, you're holding the sway of the organization energetically. And so if someone keeps showing up late to work, you have to hold the consequences to that action. Whereas as a coach, I don't have to do any of that. So there is some distinction here, but we'll try to talk about both of them. So in coaching, the way it tends to go is people are like, I want to do this thing and it matters more than anything else in the world. And then almost immediately, they're going to start living their life and they're going to resist doing that thing that matters to them more than anything else in the world. This does not mean they don't want it. This means they're human and they have a pulse. So the way it tends to go is people will make a declaration. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this thing on. And then at the start of the next call, the way I support their accountability is I ask them, how did it go with that stuff you're going to take on? And their response can be any number, right? They might be like, I did everything. Great. Cool. How was it for you? I want to know how that felt. Sometimes they'd be like, oh, I didn't do anything. I didn't do any of it. Great. Tell me what got in the way. So I'm supporting them to take account of how it went. I'm supporting them to like be accountable to themselves. Not to me. I don't care. If they're like, I didn't do any of it and fuck it and I don't want to talk about it. Great. What do you want to talk about? I have no requirement that they talk about it. In leadership, when people have said, I want to practice leadership, for example, in the Forge on our team, if they said that and we were like, well, it's actually a requirement of your leadership that you practice this. So we're going to ask you to get yourself into this conversation. You can't just choose not to. Doesn't matter. You said yes. You made a commitment. So we're holding that a little bit differently. And then when I ask as a coach, what got in the way, I'm listening for I'm listening to support the person to learn about themselves. Well, I just forgot about it. Okay, so what would you need to put in place so that you didn't forget about it? Assuming that you don't want this to keep happening. Well, I don't know. Okay, well, take some guesses. We're just kind of working with them here. And they might make a guess like, oh, well, I guess I could set an alarm on my phone. Okay, great. That sounds really good. Is there anything else? So we're just supporting them to be in a process of kind of discovery. And the reason we want to hang out and I don't know is because then someone will tell us the answer. Then we don't have to take a swing. But what allows us to grow, learn, and gain wisdom is taking swings. Maybe I'll try this. Awesome. Let's have that happen this week, and then let's check in next week and see how that went for you. So that's how we can kind of check that. Sometimes I'll be like, how'd your practices go? And then they'll Yeah, I was going to, yeah, I smiled at three people. And I'm like, I look at my notes, I'm like, smiled at three people. It says here you were going to practice like standing your ground and really being committed to like kindness. What, tell me, what's the practice you have written down? And they might be like, oh, I didn't have anything written down. Or they might be like, oh, I just wrote smile. And so then the conversation I'll bring is like, okay, is that helpful? Like, it seems like you set some practice for yourself, but what you wrote down as far as notes is concerned didn't support you to actually honor and take those practices on. Is this familiar? Oh, kind of. Okay, do you want to try something different? So the way we hold people accountable is just by remembering and bringing that question forward. It's not by like, if you don't do this, we're not going to have a coaching call. I'm never setting the consequences. Finally, sometimes people say they're going to do something, they remember that it's time to do something, they see the reminder, and they don't do it anyhow. And they come up and they're like, I didn't do the thing I said I was going to do. And so in that situation, I might ask them like, okay, so, and you want to work on this? Yeah. Okay, so what do you think is going to be required to actually like force you into the fray, to actually have you do this, even though you've got some resistance? And in those situations, it might be consequences. We would call this a structure to support them getting over their resistance. And so I would ask them, what are the consequences? What are you going to create? And sometimes people will do funny things. Like they'll be like, okay, if I don't do this, then no coaching call for me next week. That's a terrible consequence. That's the worst idea. That's like saying, if I don't do this thing I say that I'm afraid to do, then I'm going to have no support next week. It's like doubling down. So we want to move them away from that. And they may be like, okay, well, you could coach me or you could call me. How about you send me a message every night asking me if I did it? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that for a few reasons. One, because I don't have time for that. I don't want to do that. I got my own life to live. Two, because that's going to have them become reliant on me, and I want them to become more reliant in their own life. So if they brought forward a consequence like that, I'd be like, well, let's take a consequence that doesn't involve me. So who else in your life could support you this way? So these are how we work with this, and we're always looking to bring them back into their own life to help them discover the structures that support them to take the action they say they want to take in the face of their resistance to doing so. And finally, sometimes they'll come back and we'll check because they had consequences on the line. Hey, how'd it go? Yeah, I didn't do the thing. Okay, great. And I believe you had a consequence. Yeah, but I don't want to do that because I feel like the consequence is just too bad, and I really hate the person that I'm meant to like donate money to or do whatever. Okay, and then we'll have a conversation about that, because that's another situation where they're basically doubling down on their lack of accountability. They said they were going to do something, and they didn't, and then they said they were going to do another thing if they didn't do that, and they didn't do that. And so I'll stand pretty firmly for people in those situations. I'm not going to force them to do anything, but I'm going to really invite them to like consider, if you want to be more accountable in your life, and I hear you say that you do, this is the place to do it. This is the place to take that practice on, right here, right now. Because you gave your word to yourself about something, and now you're breaking it again. And the way that you change your relationship to your word is you catch the moments when you break it, and you bring yourself back into integrity. So we don't have to do this. You don't have to take this on, but can you see the possibility available if you were to take this on from that place? And usually most people from there will choose in. Consequences only work if we're willing to empower them. If we're not willing to empower them, they're not going to work, right? You can say, I'm going to saw off my leg if I don't go for a run. But if you're not really willing to saw off your leg, you're not going to go, it's not going to do any good. So we have to check. We have to make sure I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to follow through in service of my accountability. This has nothing to do with that jackass that I'm going to give money to. It's all for me. I'm using him for my transformation. That's how that works. So that's for the most part how we work with it. And in leadership conversations, the consequences are usually about you holding that line. Hey, look, you keep showing up late. We've talked to you about this 3 times. We're going to have to demote you. We're going to have to put someone in charge who's like more responsible and more like creating this benefit with time if you keep doing this. Are you clear that that's a consequence? Yes, I am. Okay, great. They show up late 3 more times. Hey, Brian, I hate to do this, but we actually have to put someone else in charge because you're just not, we need that responsibility. And what we notice is the impact of you showing up late is everyone else is showing up late. And we actually need some integrity in our leadership. So we're going to drop you down for now. We're not firing you or anything, But if you want to step back into leadership, this is going to be the requirement. That's tough. We don't want that. We don't want to have to hold consequences for other people, because then we feel like the bad guy. And what we have to learn is like, actually what we're doing is we're standing for them. We're standing for their breakthroughs. And the only way we can stand for someone's breakthrough is to be willing to hold the line. So that's how we do that in a leadership conversation. So there's times on the Forge where we've had to like really, there we're holding a leadership team as well as modeling coaching, but we're holding that leadership team. And there's times when we really have to like, hey, look, it's okay if you're not willing to do this, but then you can't be on the leadership team because there's some requirements here and there's an impact to you hanging out and I'm not willing. We don't need you to change. We're not going to require you to change, but there are some consequences that we have to manage ourselves as part of our commitment to our group and our participants. So it's your choice. You get to choose. And people will be like, I don't feel like it's a choice. It's absolutely a choice. There's consequences to either choice, but it's still a choice. You can say I'm still unwilling, or you can get supported by someone else on the leadership team to like choose from an empowered place and come back into this choice. Those are the options available. So that's how we work with that. Okay, finally, Tibby asks, I'm curious about your thoughts and experience on somatic work / coaching. And he says brackets, body versus brain. Like when you work on beliefs and being, but the body still gets paralyzed or stuck due to some associations from childhood. For example, supporting someone around intimacy and connection, but from their past, those always meant danger, suffering, and pain, and hence their body freezes and cannot relax or open up. Does it only take longer, or does it require a different approach? Or maybe it's worth considering therapy in those cases. So I'm a believer that transformation is available for all of us. And there's a myriad of paths into it. And sometimes what's required is not coaching. Bay and I, and in fact, many of the coaches we train, and also many of the coaches trained through our lineage with accomplishment coaching, are very committed to therapeutic work. Meaning, we're very committed to engaging with therapeutic inner life when that's important, and to referring people out to therapists when that's important. And so sometimes, like, part of the essence of transformational work is that we're going to bring you into a moment of confrontation with your fear, and you're going to have resistance, and you're going to have some kind of trauma response. It can be a capital T or a lowercase t. You're going to have some kind of thing show up to avoid that confrontation with your fear. And coaching is designed to support you to move through that, not to like avoid it. So that's a pretty powerful approach, which is why coaching can be so powerful for people, but it can also be confronting. And sometimes when people have a deep, deep traumatic experience rooted in their body, that approach is actually just going to rewound them. And so in those situations, we don't think the thing to do is for the coach to go take some trauma training and come back and coach them further. We think what there's to do is to refer them to a professional that works specifically with trauma, so that they can move that energy out of their system and then continue the work of coaching, either alongside the therapeutic work or after they've done the therapeutic work and come back. Likewise, I don't think coaching generally is the best modality to support someone to work with addictions. I would suggest they go and work with ayahuasca, or that they go and work with 12-step recovery work, because those structures are specifically geared towards supporting that. Again, it doesn't mean they can't continue to work with a coach. The beautiful part about coaching, transformational coaching, is that it supports people to be powerful in whatever they're choosing into in their lives. And so that can support you to really engage with 12-step recovery work powerfully. My coach supported me a lot when I was doing recovery work to be like powerful in the way I was working with that work. And when I was in a group with a woman leading it who I was like, oh my God, her leadership is whack. It's really hard for me to like engage with it. My coach supported me to like see, like, yeah, you could probably train this person on leadership, but they know a ton about recovery and they have a lot to offer you from that lens. So maybe there's some work to do to like really engage with it through that lens. So that's an example of my coach helping me to choose back into that recovery work from a more powerful place. So likewise, somatic work can be really, really potent. And just like I think coaching is not the answer for everything, I don't think anything is the answer for everything. So some people, lots of people in a variety of modalities would be like, coaching's nonsense, therapeutic cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is the only way, that's the truth. I don't think they're right. I don't think that that works for everyone. And for some people, they're like tapping, tap, what's that called? EMFD or something like that. Tapping is the answer. Tapping solves everything. And it's like, yee, but it doesn't. Because sometimes that modality is not going to get in there. If someone's really like locked their body up and is existing entirely in their head, tapping might not really be enough to make a difference. You might have to start working with the head first to soften it before the physical can actually start to get in. And likewise, ayahuasca is not the answer for everything. It's a powerful, powerful medicine, but there's some people where there's something else to happen first. And so what I'm a believer in is letting go of the idea that there's one right way, letting go of the idea that there's one soul truth, and like engaging with the modalities I find most powerful, which is say transformational coaching, plant medicines, sacred intimacy, like two body practice and embodiment work, and to be really, to the best of my ability, to be open to other modalities and to be listening for when I have clients that I think would really benefit from some of that work. So I'll often pass people along to like therapeutic work, usually when there's like just this thing that's really stuck. You know, it's been like months that we're talking about this thing and there's not been much in the way of progress. Often that'll be a time where it's like, I think therapeutic work might be a good thing to help soften this a bit so we can then start to move it through. So that's when I would work with it. That's when I would suggest like therapeutic or somatic work or any of that sort of stuff. The thing I'm always looking for in any of this is the healer taking their medicine? Is the coach working with a coach? Is the therapist actively working with their own therapist? This is because therapy, this is my experience, because therapy tends to be related to as like an as needed thing. A lot of practicing therapists aren't actively working with their own therapeutic support. Or if they do, it's just like a one-off kind of thing, or like, you know, I've got this thing showing up, help me with it. Okay, good. And as a result, they have all the knowledge and the intellect to provide, but they're lacking the being. They're disconnected to some extent, and they're doing therapy at you. And I find that tends to be the case for a lot of professions, a lot of coaches too. I don't want to, you know, probably about 85% of the coaches I meet are not actively working with their own coach. That's tragic. And so that's the thing I'm always looking for when I'm referring someone out. Does this person feel like they've got the being under them? Do they feel like they're actively getting supported and taking their own medicine? If so, awesome. Love to support that person. Love to send people their way. If not, probably not going to send people to you because there's something missing. You engaging with your own medicine. So it's very important that we take our own medicine. It for like a million reasons, but the number one reason is so that we can heal, because that's how we support the world in healing, is we do our own work and we let the work unfold in front of us from there. Someone at the end of a ceremony, night of ceremony, there was about 50, 70 of us, somewhere thereabouts. And thanks, Rocky. Rocky says he loves this mic. And a shaman named Chris, brilliant, super wise guy. I love him. Very hilarious too. Someone was acknowledging him and his team at the end of the night. They were like, oh, thank you so much for your team. Like, they were so helpful and so understanding, and they were so good at like providing me exactly what I needed and just being with me in my process. And he said, thank you so much. You know why we can do that? They're like, why? He said, because we've been there too. And every single person on at least the medicine team I work with has worked deeply with the medicine. They have drunk the medicine of ayahuasca many, many, many times. They have been through hell and back in service of their own transformation. And that's what allows us to support other people, because we no longer look at their process from an intellectual kind of, I understand this. We can be empathetic. We can be there with them as opposed to being there for them. And many, many, many approaches to support happen where you have someone there for you. And that will never have the same impact as someone that can actually be there with you. Okay, anything I meant? Oh, I was going to talk about learning to learn. Let me just check my calendar, because I liked that topic. Yeah, we can do that. We got time. So this is a piece I'm kind of I'm building out, because it started, the genesis for this is Street Fighter 6, the video game I love playing. And in Street Fighter, you have this cast of characters, and you choose typically one. You can play any of them. You choose one, and you become very good at it, if you're like me. And I'm at this place now where I'm starting a new character for variety, fun, whatever. And I'm noticing, like, oh, it's hard. I got to learn all of this stuff from the ground up again. I got to figure out, like, what does this guy do well? What is his preferred range to be in combat? What do I want to do in these situations where I know what to do with my other character? And so it's this process of learning again. And I was reflecting on that and thinking how, like, oh, watch, I was meditating and this came to me, was this idea of, like, how do we learn to learn? What's the best way to learn? And what I realized is, as humans, we lose sight of this, and we don't have a good understanding of how to learn. We have just our intuitive and more often our patterned way of learning, but we don't have a very strong understanding of how, like, we don't have a well put together scaffolding for, like, how best to learn. And so this is going to be a longer piece that I'm working on, but the first piece I want to share is learning to notice. This, by the way, anytime we're doing transformational work, we're learning to learn. And so noticing is crucial in our practice of learning. And that sounds stupidly easy and obvious, but let me elaborate. In a game like Street Fighter, there are moments where something the opponent does, they do something, and we're like, ah, crap, they keep getting me with that. It's like if you're playing soccer and someone kicks the ball through your legs 10 times in a row, and you're like, fuck me. And so this becomes something we want to work on. I want to get better. I don't want to let my opponent get away with that anymore. And so there's a learning process we have to move through to get there. Part of that learning process is we've got to learn, like, what do I actually technically need to do? What needs to happen? I need to close my legs, or I need to position myself differently, or I need to, like, in response to what he did, I need to do this. And then I need to practice that so I can execute it in my body. So that's the first stage. That's the practice stage. That's the part where most of us are reliable, but then don't go further. The next thing that's really important, and probably the most important, is to notice the window of opportunity for when we could then start doing something different. And this we don't pay much reverence to, and we also don't pay much acknowledgement to ourselves for doing. So in a game like Street Fighter, it's very fast paced. And what happens is that I've got my pattern, my opponent's got their pattern that we're doing, like, we know what to do. And then my opponent does this thing that I know I can counter, but if I don't counter it quickly, he gets a huge advantage and takes a bunch of my life bar away. And so we're in the heat of the battle, and he does it. I'm like, ah, crap. I did the wrong thing. And he does it again. Ah, crap. It's like the soccer ball kicking through my legs. And so in order to start to change the way that goes, I have to start to notice the moments when that's happening. I have to start to catch those moments in the moment. Not thinking about them after the fact. Not like, oh yeah, when that, I need to do that. That's easy, because that exists in our mind, and we've got all the time in the world, and we can construct things however we want in our mind. It's catching it in the moment. That's the hard part. And so the first stage of learning is really just noticing those opportunities. Just like, oh, here's the opportunity. He did it to me anyway. Oh, here's another opportunity. Because as we can start to notice those moments, then we can start to expand the window. We can start to expand time in those moments so they don't go by so quickly. I find in my own process and many other people's process that this is one of the hardest places in learning, because as we're learning to notice those moments more often, what it means is that we notice us eating a bag of shit more often. We notice, crap, there it goes again. And we get frustrated with ourselves. Fuck, it keeps happening and I'm not doing anything. I suck at this. I'm a loser. I'm bad. I'm not learning. I'm terrible. And what we have to do is learn how to bring grace and compassion and acknowledgement to ourselves. The more you notice something, the more you are learning the opportunity that is arising. And that is crucial. So the first stage in learning to learn is really learning how to see the opportunity, the moment to do something different. And there is a period of time I find for myself, perhaps you'll find the same, where all I can do is notice it. And if I notice it, I have to pat myself on the back, because that's the moment where I had, like, that's new for me. Now I'm conscious of that moment, whereas before I was unconscious of it. Slowly I can start to inject something different now, but like in this moment, I'm catching it. Amazing. So that's learning how to learn. That's the first part, is learning how to notice and learning how to have grace for ourselves and really acknowledge ourselves for that practice. It takes a lot. It takes a lot just to notice this thing. And because of the way we are as humans, we are already like 50 steps down the road. We can see like everything that should be happening, right? I should be able to deal with this. I shouldn't be getting hit with that. I should already be past this, but we're not. Where we are is where we are. And so if where you are right now and whatever you're trying to learn in your life is noticing, celebrate yourself for that. Really, really celebrate yourself for that practice of being able to notice this just one more time each day. And if you can notice it one more time each day, over time, that's going to start to open that window. Time will start to slow down a little bit more. And then you can start to put in the opportunity in that moment. More to come on that. That'll be a bigger post. I think that's probably a 10-page, maybe even like I'm thinking possibly like a little ebook or something like that. I don't know, a pamphlet. Anyhow, I've got to go to the bathroom. And that means that this live show is ending. So thanks everyone for tuning in, hanging out. Thanks for all the viewers. Thanks Rocky, Monica. Who else do we have? Daniel. Bit of a quiet one today. Thanks Tara. And big thanks to David, Monica, Tibby, and Tara for your questions. Super helpful. Really, really appreciate you. Have an amazing week, everyone. I'll catch you in 2 weeks. Adios.